Welcome to Epithets, exploring the sacred titles of Hekate.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again on an episode of Epithets. This is your co-host, Isaac Vars,
And your other co-host, Robin Silverman.
and today we are here to talk about Hekate Drakaina, which is a really cool, fierce, awesome epithet. Robin, tell us a little bit about Drakaina.
Well, Drakaina, the word
Or
Drakaina,
rather,
go on.
yeah, sorry, I was saying, or rather the etymology.
The word Drakaina is actually the feminine form of Drakon, which just means dragon. So the word itself means something like dragoness, female dragon. But the way it gets used in mythology is a little more specific than that. It's not just, the female version of a dragon. It's kind of a specific type of being, how it gets depicted. Um, and the word for this kind of being, it's kind of an odd word, but it's Greek. It's anguipede, which means snake-footed. And you see these depictions of Drakaina or descriptions, and they're usually some form of a woman snake hybrid. You'll see something like, a being that has the upper half of their body is a woman and their lower half is the tail of a snake, or you might see something that has multiple snake tails, or she might have like a feminine human torso, but a snake head and snake tail. Sometimes they have multiple heads, but this kind of being shows up in different ways in Greek mythology and is usually referred to as a Drakaina. So it's not specific to Hekate. There are a lot of these Drakaina in Greek mythology, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of them.
And hopefully try to figure out how it all kind of relates to Hekate. Other epithets that I found that still have that root in there: Zona Dracontis, encircled by serpents or surrounded by serpents or dragons. Pio Dracontizonis, girt with flaming serpents or flaming dragons. Spiro Dracontizonis, girt with serpent coils. Tora Dracana, a bull dragon mix. So that there's a lot there, and it kind of starts harkening back to, I know we've talked a little bit about, or a lot of it, about the Orphic hymn to Hecate, talking about the snakes in her hair having a very Gorgon-like aspect, connecting both of those characters in sort of that averting harm or just averting danger kind of energy. But that's what I had found.
Yeah,
Robin had found a whole bunch of really cool stuff in a book from Daniel Ogden.
yeah. The book is called The Dragon in the West, and Daniel Ogden is a classical scholar. He's written some really great source books on ancient magic, and I definitely recommend him. But he did a whole book on dragons in classical literature, and he has a whole chapter on the Drakaina. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about on this podcast right now is going to come from Ogden because he's a really great source for this. Just want to give him credit up front. But he talks a lot about this anguipede form, and also the snake hair you mentioned, Isaac, the Gorgon that we associate the most with the Gorgons is also often a feature of these Drakaina monsters. They will have snaky hair. Sometimes Hecate has snaky hair. And this whole idea of the snake hair and even the idea of multi-headedness seems to be really connected with this dragon Drakaina image. And it gets applied sort of metaphorically to a lot of different figures, including like Circe, Clytemnestra, actually. Athena at one point gets called Drakaina. There are some early Christian authors who use it of biblical characters like Delilah and Salome. But what a lot of these characters seem to have in common is this idea of the kind of avenging woman who will destroy her mate. And again, I'm not quite sure how that relates to Hecate, but it does seem to be something that's kind of the energy of this being is she's sort of the terrifying feminine. So it gets applied to these sort of very scary female characters. And actually, it also gets applied, speaking of, Clytemnestra, it gets applied to the Furies, the Erinyes. Aeschylus talked about in Eumenides, which was one of the plays about Clytemnestra. He describes the Furies as resembling Gorgons, and that they howl like hunting dogs. And so the Furies are described as Drakaina, and they're often depicted that way, right, with the serpentine tails. And all of this seems incredibly Hecatean to me, this idea of, the snaky hair and the howling like dogs. But this is talking about the Furies, so it's again this avenging, this feminine avenger kind of image. So that to me feels very Hecatean. And the original Languipede, again referring back to Ogden, is this being known as Echidna. Echidna is the mother. She's the mother of monsters, she's often called, because if you have a famous monster in Greek mythology, Echidna is probably their mother. She's the mother of Cerberus, of Hydra, of the Sphinx, of the Nemean lion. And her partner, her mate, was Typhon, who's also described as a dragon, and who's associated with volcanic activity in the underworld. Like Typhon is like the fury of the earth, right? And so we have the fury of the earth with Typhon, and Echidna, who is sometimes depicted as the beautiful woman with the lower snake calf. Sometimes she's described as having 100 heads, so she's got this multi-headed thing too, which we also see in beings like Cerberus and the Hydra. But again, we have this sort of terrifying female, who is, in the case of Echidna, she's like the mother of all the monsters. The monsters come from her womb, and they're sired by this dragon who lives under the volcanoes. So again, we have this sort of deep underworld, sort of wrathful kind of monster.
And not to totally sideline you, but aren't there, I believe that when it comes to Hekate, there are epithets both talking about her being 100-handed, and there might be one that has her having 100 heads as well, if I'm not incorrect.
Yeah, and of
Is that
course
something that you...
Yeah, definitely. And of course, she's also often depicted as having, 3 heads or multiple heads. So she also kind of fits in with this whole theme, with this sort of multi-headed underworld figure.
That is really, yeah, on my end, with all the dragon stuff that I had looked up, there was a lot, first of all, taken from the Ogden book, it seemed. So Robin had shared it with me, and I was not able to get my hands on a copy of it before this episode, but it seemed like it had a bunch of really cool stuff, and then really bringing it in and relating it both to Hekate was really exciting. And it also relates to Medea, which we'll get to later on in the episode. But also the PGM.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know how much more you have to talk about Ogden.
Oh, I have so much more.
Ooh, all right. Okay. Well, then I don't want to sideline you. I want to hear it.
You're not sidelining at all. But we were talking right before we started recording about Delphi, right? And the Python at Delphi. And Ogden, and of course in other sources as well, describes the sort of different story. I mean, the story I think that most people know about Delphi has to do with Apollo slaying the Python, right? The great snake. But there's another story where the monster that he slays is Delphine, who is a female dragon, a Drakaina. She's described as a Drakaina. So she's related to Delphi in that way. And one of the interesting things about Delphine, her name actually means womb. I mean, we were just talking about Echidna as like this mother of monsters. Delphine is actually from the word womb, the Greek word for womb. And in a lot of mythology, Delphine is actually the mother of Typhon, the volcanic dragon that was the mate of Echidna. So this it all kind of ties in together, this sort of mother of monsters, mother of dragons. But this is related directly to Delphi, which I think is really cool. And so this idea that Apollo slayed this monster there.
are you aware of some of the theories about the central? There's a column called the column of dancers at Delphi. Have you heard about this?
What was that?
The column of Delphi,
Oh yeah.
or sorry, the column of dancers, and it's a column of three women back to back around a column, and their arms are raised, and you can't really tell what was happening with the hands because the hands have been lost. They've just been broken off, sands of time lost. And there's a lot of theories out there about who these three ladies are on this column in the Temple of Delphi. And some people are just like, I don't know, it's meaningless dancers. Some people talk about it maybe local noble daughters. Other people go a little more mythological, which would make sense with just where it is, and talk about it. Maybe it's the Graces, but there's a lot of well, there's again, there's only so many hints because you just see three female bodies, but there are some hints that it may actually be Hekate, which is really interesting and hinting at a role of Hekate in Delphi that we don't know about in the modern world. There's also it could also potentially be related to Artemis, which would make a little more sense with, you know, Apollo being the god of Delphi, having his twin sister there, just kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
But when that one, people guess that a little, I believe that the dresses are a little shorter, so that plays a little more towards the idea of it being Artemis instead of Hecate, but it still could have been Hecate, and they're both again conflated. So there's that as well, relating her again, kind of indirectly to the Delphic Python.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to get more specifically Hecatean, again, Ogden talks about he says that the earliest image that we actually have of Hecate is a vase painting from 470 BC, where Hecate is actually shown as an anguipede, as having these sort of the lower body of a serpent with some dogs. So actually the oldest representation we have of Hecate shows her as a Drakaina figure. So this goes way back. And he relates this to this really wonderful quote from, the vase is from about 470 BC, and this quote is from the 2nd century CE, so centuries later. But Ogden gives us this quote from Lucian's Philopseudes. Lucian was a Roman satirist, basically. Philopseudes means lover of lies. And it's a book of stories. It's actually where the original story of the Sorcerer's Apprentice comes from. But this is a quote from an anguipede, from Philopseudes, describing Hecate as an anguipede. And I'm going to read the whole quote because it's just fantastic. I saw a fearsome woman approaching me, almost half a stadium's length high. In her left hand, she held a torch, and in her right, a sword 20 cubits long. Below the waist, she was snake-footed. Above it, she resembled a gorgon, so far as concerns the look in her eyes and her terrible appearance. Instead of hair, writhing snakes fell down in curls around her neck, and some of them coiled over her shoulders. The goddess's dogs were taller than Indian elephants, similarly black and shaggy with dirty matted hair. Anyway, when I saw her, I came to a halt and at the same time turned back the seal ring that the Arab had given me to the inside of my finger. Hecate stamped on the ground with her dragon foot and created a huge chasm as deep as Tartarus. Presently she jumped into it and was gone. I steeled myself and bent over it, after taking hold of a tree that was growing near the hole to stop myself falling it headfirst from vertigo. Then I saw everything in Hades, Pyriphlegethon, the lake, Cerberus, and the dead, whom I could see so clearly that I even recognized some of them. I got a good view of my father, still dressed in the clothes in which we had buried him. So, as Ogden points out, the way Hecate is described in this quote is so similar to the image from the vase, from the Lekythos, from 500 years before this. So, this image of Hecate as this snake-footed anguipede Drakaina figure really persists. And I just love that quote of, her stomping her dragon foot and the pit to Tartarus opens up. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, it is. That is fantastic. And very Brimo-esque too, isn't it?
It is, yeah, yeah. I think there's definitely some overlap there because, yeah, in her Drakaina form, she's usually described as terrifying in the way similar way to Brimo.
I definitely wouldn't want to get on the bad side of a dragon goddess myself.
Yeah, she stomps her dragon foot. And I love the ending there where he looks down into Hades and sees his father wearing the clothes they buried him in. Like, oh, hi, Dad. It's a great little great little bit. But that's
I can't wait to
actually,
get my hands
yeah,
on a copy of one of this book.
yeah. Oh yeah, it's a great book. And I mean the whole book is fantastic. I'm mostly drawing on, he has one entire chapter on the Drakaina, this female dragon figure, but the whole book is great because it's about all different dragons in Greek and Roman mythology.
Very
But
cool.
that's where we get this
Very
sort of,
cool.
yeah, this direct reference to Hekate as a Drakaina. And said it goes way back. But actually calling her Drakaina, using Drakaina as an epithet, I think we just have from the PGM. And I don't know,
Right,
Isaac,
which we had.
you want to talk a little bit about those PGM spells?
Sure. Well, we've actually kind of talked about them
Yeah,
in the last episode because they both kind of come up. The
yeah,
first one that we had found was the document to the waning moon. And let's see, I'm scrolling down to the bit here. Yeah. Here, io forba brimo sach mi nebauta soleth, for I have hidden this magical symbol. Da, 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 da. Below, as you see yourself, you'll wonder at the mirror the love charm of the Nile's goddess until you cast the dark light from your eyes. What you must do, this you must not escape. You'll willy-nilly do. I love that line. That's a
hmm
really hilarious uh translation. You'll willy-nilly do this task for me. Mare, Kore, Dragoness, Lamp, Lightning Flash. So that right there, that Dragoness is Drakaina. And the other one was the charm of Hekate Ereshkigal against fear of punishment. I had talked a little bit about this one kind of amping up if people mess with you. If, however, he comes close to you, take a hold of your right heel and recite the following: Ereshkigal, Virgin, Lady Dog, Serpent, Wreath, Key, Herald's Wand, Golden Sandal, Lady of Tartarus. And the serpent there is where, in Greek, it's Drakaina, but it was translated as serpent in this specific translation. So that was those two right there, where it was traditionally, historically associated with Hekate. And along with Typhon, a few other ones, a few other dragons, really good connection to, or rather, a strong historical connection to dragons and Hekate is Medea, or rather, the story of Medea, starting with the Colchim dragon, who was the child of Typhon and Echidna. You had mentioned that,
yep,
these were kind of the parents of monsters. The one that guarded the golden fleece at Colchis, and this was the final thing that Jason had to do for the golden fleece and what Medea was helping him with. And this monster was guarding where the fleece was hidden in the garden of the Hesperides. And Medea was the one that used magic or herbs, depending on what you're reading, and put this dragon to sleep. So Jason could go and get the golden fleece. And as we had talked about Medea as the not only the granddaughter of Helios, but the a priestess of Hecate. This was very related to her and the magic of Hecate. Everything that she had done magically for Jason and otherwise is related to Hekate and the other relationships. And this is interesting. So in one of the stories, right, maybe a few of the stories, Medea, after things go south with her and Jason, and depending on who you ask, either the people of gosh, I'm sorry, the name, there we go. The people in Corinth killed her kids because she killed Jason's new lover, who was the princess, or she killed the kids in vengeance against Jason, or however that went down. Helios sent a chariot drawn by a great dragon to come and rescue her and take her away to Athens or maybe elsewhere. Again, depends on the story that you're looking at. And that was supposed to be the chariot and dragon, as I understood that, pulled Helios. That's the only time I ever hear about Helios being pulled by a dragon. Normally, you hear the story about Helios and his chariot being pulled by horses, usually four horses. Robin, do you have any other information to kind of enlighten me about that and kind of shed a little extra light on this dragon
Uh,
chariot?
on Medea's dragon chariot. Um, well, the dragon chariot again goes way back, and um, my opinion on this is that putting her in a dragon chariot, like of course, like you say, we hear about Helios and his chariot drawn by horses, but putting Medea in a dragon chariot, I think, is a way of once again connecting her with this Drakaina figure, this Drakaina current, so that it's she's not being carried away by Helios's forces. She's being carried away by the dragons are her own thing, right? She's related to
Right.
dragons in this way. She's the same kind of figure. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the Drakaina is often associated with this sort of scary, avenging mother figure. And Medea at this point certainly fits in with that. Whatever version of the story you go with, she's still a pretty terrifying mother. And so I think having the dragons in there, the dragons pulling her chariot, are a way of kind of keeping this mythological theme of showing her as this kind of figure. That
Okay, yeah. I mean, and she is. I mean, either way, no matter whether you believe she that her kids were killed by the Corinthians, that she was tricked into killing the kids because she was convinced that burying them at a site for Hera would make them immortal and ended up killing them. Or, she did the deed herself. No matter what, she did definitely off the Princess Glauke, who Jason was trying to leave her for. So she's definitely she gets stuff done and in an intense kind of way. But yeah, okay, I had read sources that had related the dragon to Helios, but I couldn't find a connection beyond that, and so that's why
yeah,
I'm kind of leaning with you with that. That's just more based on feeling than for me, more based on feeling than anything that's actually historically factual.
yeah. I mean, the her flying off in a chariot pulled by dragons. I mean, they can't exactly have her, I don't know, sprout dragon leg. I suppose they could have her sprout serpent legs at the end, like a proper anguipede, but being pulled off in a chariot pulled by dragons, um, kind of gives the same energy, as
Yeah.
being this sort of serpent-footed being.
I don't know. They did that to Cadmius and Harmonia. They're like, at the
Yeah,
end of
that's
that
true.
story, we're going to
That's
turn them
true.
into dragons.
They could
But,
have done it that way.
but yeah, absolutely. There's also the mastery of the dragon, where Cadmius and Harmonia were more,
Yeah.
the kind of punishments. It was interesting. It was interesting even to look at the stories where Medea does this awful deed of rage killing her own children. let's say, that's not the oldest story, and uh, that's that was probably added for dramatic effect and to make her seem more like the bad guy. So you could maybe feel more for Jason, who without that, you're just kind of watching Jason use Medea, and then once he gets to his final goal, be like, I know you just gave me children, help me get to where I want to go, help me get my quest, but I'm tired of you. I'm going to go for this other lady, and our marriage doesn't count because, you're a foreigner, which is how that goes. But uh gosh, oh yeah, but at the end of that, Jason is saying that she is hated by the gods, and I don't know, the gods still seem to be kind of on her side, sending
Yeah,
a
yeah,
chariot pulled by a dragon to get her out of the situation. So there's, anyways,
yeah,
the
and that's actually kind of
it it,
making me
it,
think of
it
it's kind of making me think of the story of, Clytemnestra, who killed her husband as revenge for him sacrificing their daughter. Um, and Clytemnestra also gets called Drakaina. And so um, it's easy in some ways to see Clytemnestra as the bad guy there because she did kill her husband as soon as he got home from the war. But um, there's also this sense that the gods are just fine with it.
yeah. Well, there's this. It's interesting to that there's definitely this protective mother aspect. Kind of goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about again. I'm glad that this followed up Brimo, because there's a lot of Brimo energy in this,
Yeah.
in this protection, in this vengeance over loss, and potentially protecting children. If we were looking at Medea in the sense where her children were killed or she was tricked into killing her children, either way, this is, you know, I I would be quite vengeful too.
Yeah.
So that that interesting.
Yeah.
An
And the association with the
interesting.
Furies as well as this whole
Oh
idea of
yeah.
vengeance. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess there is a lot of vengeance, maybe even righteous vengeance in this, or I guess, who's defined righteous vengeance. But vengeance against those that have wronged you
Hmm.
with this epithet, and with the energy that comes with it. Yeah, I guess that kind of leads right into a little bit of magic of Dracana,
Yeah.
which we were kind of talking a little bit about before this episode, because I hadn't really sat down and thought of any magic. But the themes that seem to pop up with this, one, we could look at the two PGM spells that we mentioned, the document of the waning moon and the charm of Hekate Ereshkigal Galligan's fear of punishment. Both of those have that vengeful feel, but also a protective feel. There's a lot of apotropaic energy with that, a lot of apotropaic themes, both that, or if you're looking at, gorgons with the snaky hair, going back to snake bits, or as something that's Dracana, or you could look at it in the way of Python in Delphi, the relation of dragons to chthonic energy, underworld energy, and through that chthonic underworld energy, bringing a little bit of divination, or I guess seeing into the dark, seeing into the unknown,
Mhm.
calling on a being of the unknown to connect to it and to find a little bit of that prophecy. So if you're trying to up your game and doing a little bit of prophecy and doing some trance work to let let the underworld current speak through you to prophesize, yeah, she would be a good power both to call on, both to connect to that and also to protect you against any unwelcome energies that may come along with that. Do you have any other ideas?
Yeah, I would also, I feel like the Drakaina energy is something to um tread lightly with, to be very careful.
Yeah.
I think anything associated with the Furies, it's not something to mess around with. It's if you,
Hmm.
I think it would be fantastic for vengeance, especially, but only if somebody has really wronged you, like actually wronged you, actually done you a deep injustice. Like make sure that you're in the right there, because the Furies will go for whoever's in the wrong. Um, so if you're, you know, perhaps not being honest with yourself about who is actually in the wrong in a situation, you might want to, tread carefully there. Because I feel like that Drakaina energy, that wrathful mother energy is very powerful. And in stories of the Furies, I mean, one of the sort of themes you get in stories about the Furies are kind of unleashing them, and then not being, and then having the justice that is done is more than you wanted. It's not really what you wanted at all, but you
Mhm.
can't do anything about it because you've already set it in motion. That's definitely a theme with the Furies, with the Erinyes. Um, so I would say that if you're going to work with Drakaina in that way, um, be careful. I'd say just be very careful.
I just thought of another really interesting way to do this. So it, this would be really interesting using the oh, cool. All right. This is an idea, an untested idea. So for all of you listeners, this is one of Isaac's untested magical ideas that might be a good idea or might be terrible. I don't know. I always think of dragons with protection of treasures, right? And again, with the Garden of the Hesperides, the Golden Fleece was protected by a dragon. And oh, I mean, there's also Ladon who was protecting the Garden of the Hesperides, and
Yeah,
the
the
Golden
dragon maiden.
Apple and all of that. So there's all of these Greek protective dragons that are protecting the thing. Uh and it'd be really interesting to call upon Hekate Drakaina trying to create a spirit house to house a protective spirit to help protect and hide an item or something that you don't want found.
Hmm.
And again, this is theory, but I was just kind of thinking about this and dragons and disparities and just brought me back to all these protective dragons that are protecting a treasure. Even the big, if we're looking at just Western or just European mythology around dragons as these beings that hoard gold and protect it, that which is very underworldy, kind of looking more towards Pluto. And if we're
Yeah.
looking at Roman mythology,
Yeah, you have the dragon and the
and
key guarding the treasure.
right, oh, and then the key too.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, there we are.
There we are.
So Dracana would be a really that would be a lot of fun trying to work those epithets into some kind of magic to help call on her to help bring forth a spirit to inhabit a spirit house that does a protective job.
Hmm. I could see
Huh.
that.
Again, theory, ideas,
Hmm.
magical ideas, not something that I've tested out specifically in that way. So there's that. Do you have anything else for Dracana, Robin?
Um, I, 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 I don't think so. I like this idea too of the apotropaic. I noticed that in the PGM spells, there's this, both of them mention in that sort of list of epithets, along with Dracana is the maiden, like that's the maiden and then the Dracana. And I can see that again with these sort of mother figures as kind of a protective thing for young women. I feel like
Oh,
if I had a young daughter, I think Dracana as a protective kind of energy for her is something I would be looking at.
I really love that. That'd be a really lovely. Yeah, that'd be fun to really dig into.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, for those of you who don't already do this, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. We are out there. Just look for epithets podcast. We are out there to be found, and we would love for you to follow us. I try to keep everybody updated there, and lovely. Next week we will be getting a little creative. It's funny because we want to really talk about the plants of Hekate, and we were kind of struggling to find a historical epithet to cover that. And while we have seen the use of pharmakeia as an epithet, I was having a hard time trying to really finding a historical root to it outside of using the word pharmaca as an epithet. So next episode will be about Hekate pharmakeia, and we'll see if we can find more historical stuff, or perhaps how we can be working with a more modernly created epithet that still rings true to Hekate and who she is, both historically and how we relate to her now. So join us for that. That'll be a lot of fun. Until then, thank you for listening, and we hope you have a great day.